You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And we're joined today by author Louis Bayard, here to talk to us about The Pale Blue Eye, an amazing book that is soon to be hitting theaters as a movie of the same name. Lou, thank you so much for joining us today.
So great to be here. Thank you for having me.
We've had this interesting discussion about whether Louis Bayard would let us call him Lou, and he said yes, which we think is a big stepping stone towards the kind of relationship
Absolutely.
We'd like to
Full
have.
Intimacy, full-on intimacy from the start, guys. Here we are.
All access. So, Lou, go ahead and start off by telling us a little bit about your personal and professional background.
Oh dear, that's a long and tangled and sordid story, but I am a writer of novels. I'm a novelist, and I mostly write historical novels. I've written 10 so far. 8 of them have been historical, and then some of those historical veer in the direction of mystery and thriller and horror and all those gothic directions that bring me here now to your doorstep.
And my favorite piece of Lou trivia is that you once were on Jeopardy! Isn't that right?
I am a one-time Jeopardy champion. That is something I will take to my grave. Yes.
I didn't know that. I'm even more impressed.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for being impressed by that. I'm embarrassed, though, that I lost the second one on Final Jeopardy. The answer was Balmoral. So every time I watch The Crown, I just feel a stab I just feel a stab of regret about missing that because, otherwise I would have won for sure. And then I would have gone from there to being, who knows, 100-time champion, I'm sure.
Yeah, you might still be on the show.
Balmoral hurdle. Yeah.
Decades as champ. People would have been sick of you by now.
It's like, get him off. We're tired of him. Every night he wins.
The guy's insufferable, and he's won like a gazillion dollars.
Yeah, not my path.
Were you getting sandbagged with the question about Balmoral? Did they ask the question in a weird way, which is why you didn't get it?
They asked it in a weird way, but somebody got it. And it just wasn't me.
Yeah.
In fact, she was the third place going into Final Jeopardy, and the two guys.
At the end.
Right. Yeah, it was one of those stories that actually, as a viewer, you love. Oh, wait, the underdog wins. But wait,
she came from behind.
I was ahead. No, stop.
Yeah. Do you think you'd ever want to work that into a book? If it because
it's a very specific experience for sure. But I don't know. Yeah.
What's the short version of how you get on Jeopardy?
The short version is in those days, this is a while ago, this was 16 years ago, but you take a test, I guess it's an online test now, and then you're invited to come in for basically kind of audition where you stand up with a bunch of other people who pass the test and you stand up and answer questions in a play round or a practice round. And I think they're just looking to see if don't fall apart in front of a camera. And then I got the call a few months later and then had to get myself out to California. They don't pay for your travel or your hotel.
Oh, nice. That's cheeseball.
Wow. Yeah. So I prevailed upon my publisher I forget what I asked them to pay for, because it is either the airfare or the hotel. Because I said, if I can, I will promote the book, which just came out, which was in fact The Pale Blue Eye, which leads us around to the topic of today's show. But this happened right when that book came out. And I thought, this will be interesting. And then, in fact, in the very first round, the Jeopardy round, there was a Poe question, which I successfully answered, thank God.
Yeah, really, that would have been embarrassing.
There we are. Yeah.
And are there clips somewhere on the internet that would show you on Jeopardy?
Why do you ask this, Bill? Do you want people to actually find this? Do you want to find this?
Because Kristin and I love digging
this into stuff. This stuff is archived in places that I don't even know about. So I'm sure you could find it. If you wanted to, if you have a lot of time on your hands, you could look for this.
We pride ourselves in our research team, which is the two of us. I didn't mean for that to sound all stalkerish and weird. Now that you've decided to let me call you Lou.
Yeah, the gates are open. Everything is free game. Yeah, open game. Yep.
Lou, we did want to talk to you about The Pale Blue Eye, not only because A, it's a wonderful book, B, it involves Edgar Allan Poe, and C, it has a movie coming out here in just a very little bit. But I know we do have some listeners who probably are not familiar with Pale Blue Eye. So can you give us like the 5-sentence summary of The Pale Blue Eye?
If that's possible.
This is elevator speech. Is this the elevator speech part of it?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the Pale Blue Eye is a Gothic mystery thriller set in West Point circa 1830, featuring a young Edgar Allan Poe, who was in fact a cadet at that time. So he becomes, in effect, a detective along with an older professional detective in solving a series of crimes that are taking place at West Point involving the killing of cadets and the carving of hearts out of their bodies. So it's just a light little holiday comedy, really.
Yeah,
this is how I try to describe it.
Yeah. It's holiday appropriate.
Just to make sure that we're clear on the line here between fact and fiction,
Yes.
To the best of your knowledge, was Edgar Allan Poe a detective in his spare time? Is this something that he did on the regular?
I don't think he was a detective at West Point. That was just my conceit, really, because I decided I wanted to put Poe in the center of a mystery genre. Why? Because he was the creator of that genre. So I thought it would be fun to plop him in the middle of it and have him fend for himself, as it were. So I was casting around for a suitable place, part in his life to explore. And I realized, or remembered perhaps, that he had been at West Point for 6 months before being court-martialed out. And I thought, well, that'd be a fascinating place to have crimes to solve. And this would be a fascinating place to have, in effect, an Edgar Allan Poe origin story, which is really what the book is. It's about how Edgar Allan Poe became that guy, how he absorbed these various themes and where these various stories came from. The title, I should say, The Pale Blue Eye, comes from The Telltale Heart. If you remember that story, it's about the narrator is this guy who conceives a pathological disgust for this old man, and specifically for the old man's pale blue eye. And that's what drives him to kill the old man, stuff him under the floorboards, and then invite the police over so that he can gloat over this perfect crime, only to hear the heart of the old man beating underneath the floorboard. The Pale Blue Eye came straight from the Telltale Heart, and so much of Poe's work, his stories, both mystery stories and horror stories, inform the book itself.
It's often been said that it was Edgar Allan Poe rather than Sir Arthur Conan Doyle who's actually responsible for the invention of the detective genre as we know it today. Can you talk a little bit about like how Poe contributed to the genre the way that we understand it today?
Sure. Poe wrote the first detective stories in the English language, for sure. And I think Conan Doyle acknowledged that at some point. You would have to ask Mr. Stashower about this, but I think Conan Doyle was very clear that Sherlock Holmes came out of C. Auguste Dupin, who was the great detective hero of Poe's stories, beginning with the murders in the Rue Morgue, continuing through the Purloined Letter and the Mystery of Marie Roget. These are really the first detective stories that we know of in the English language. So it's clear to me, and I think it's clear to would have been clear to Doyle, too, that he got there first. And I think Poe's great innovation, his great understanding, was that there's something just interesting about the act of solving a crime. The stories themselves, if you read them, are almost action-free. All the crimes themselves happen off the page. And the action, if we can call it that, is just this guy, C. Auguste Dupin, sitting in his chair in the Faubourg Saint-Germain in Paris, looking at newspaper accounts and just figuring out who did it. And it was Poe's genius to really see that was dramatic enough in itself. He didn't need chases. He didn't need fights. He didn't need any violence. He just knew that just the watching a great mind apply itself to this particular problem was interesting in itself. And we see the results everywhere. It's impossible to overstate how influential Poe has been in our culture. He's so much a part of our culture that I don't think we always see him. He's hardwired into our DNA. But every time you see a mystery story, every time you see a horror story, Gothic story, you're seeing a genre that he himself either created or definitively shaped. So really the book was my homage to Poe. That's how I conceived it from the very start.
So some of these conceits that get ladled on later, like you're saying, the car chase or the physical confrontations or all of that stuff, that kind of is a step away from this more kind of cerebral, literally sitting in a chair discussing the details of a crime. Sometimes a horrific crime, but in a real thoughtful way. And it's funny, even as you were saying that, I was thinking about any number of modern era detectives in literature and film and television and so on. And there is a whole school of detectives that came along later that are in that sort of, let me walk you through what I think happened analytical approach, which is much more Poe's, that kind of approach that he was helping create. Yeah,
I think Poe's approach to it becomes the cozy detective story in some ways. That sense of Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple, Lord Peter Wimsey, very courteous and civil, and they're never in danger. Really, they're just brought in to apply their formidable brains to a problem. And that was really, I think, that the thing that interested Poe about crime itself was just how do we solve it? He was big into puzzles. He was big into codes, decoding, cracking codes. He just loved an intellectual challenge, and he grasped that this would be a particularly interesting one.
If I'm remembering it right, didn't he call his crime-solving process ratiocination? Am I getting that right?
I've never even pronounced that, Kristin. Is it ratiocination, ratios? I've never known.
I feel like it's ratiocination, I think.
Yes,
but I'm not sure. I guess maybe we need to ask Dan about that one.
Help us out now. Define what that is.
It's just basically the act of using your brain to figure something out. It's just a fancy word for just using your brain. And that's what goes on in his stories. And that's what makes them interesting, is just seeing a brain at work. Like, as I said, I think that was one of his real insights, is that there's drama just in that.
I feel like it's almost a precursor to modern day profiling, like a really early version of it.
Good call. Yeah.
Something that just popped into my head while we were talking about some of those great characters and that cerebral detective approach. For some reason, Peter Falk jumped into my head with
Columbo. Gosh, yes, Columbo. Now, perfect example, Bill. Absolutely.
He turns the stylistic thing on its head. In other words, a lot of those detectives like Poirot and others, even Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, they had a lot of style in terms of clothing and how they carried themselves. And Peter Falk turned all that stuff on its head with the Columbo character. But the thoughtful, walk me through this kind of approach, he's very much following in those footsteps as well.
Absolutely. And in that case, and this was the genius of this show, they showed you the crime up front.
Yes.
You knew exactly who had been murdered, by whom, why. You knew exactly how the crime happened, and the drama. And you're right, this is so close to Poe. It's just watching a really intelligent guy figure it out. He's going to do it. By the end of the show, he's going to figure it out. But you're just wondering, how will he apply his formidable, but of course, underrated intellect to this problem? And it's exactly the same as what's going on in Poe's original stories.
One of Poe's, I think, probably biggest conceits of all was the fact that he felt he could take his process. And again, I really don't know if I'm saying that, but we're going to go with it.
We'll go with that.
He took that and he tried to apply it to a modern day true crime case during his time period. Yes. And that's the Mary Rogers case. I know one of his stories is based on Mary Rogers. Can you tell us a little bit about how Poe involved himself in that case? Again, knowing that is more Dan's area.
That is so Dan Stashower. He wrote a book called The Beautiful Cigar Girl about that. And this was a very notorious case in New York City. I think it was 1850s. Was it?
1850s.
Yeah. Okay. So what happened was, this was a notorious case of a beautiful young woman murdered, and they didn't have any immediate culprits. Poe decided to turn this into his own guessing game, and he converted it into another Dupin story, The Mystery of Marie Roget. Basically transmogrified all the press coverage that was happening around Mary Rogers to a Parisian newspaper. He just did a very slight Gallic transformation of the names and tried to come up with his own solution. It's interesting, and I think Dan Stashower will be the first to say this, it's his least successful Dupin story. And I think because he himself is too close to it, and he himself is trying to honor the very complicated details that were happening at the time. But yes, he desperately was trying to solve that. He was the armchair detective in that one. himself, and he did not solve it. I don't think it was ever solved. I should know that. Yeah. It's one of those unsolved mysteries. Dan Statcher was attracted to those ones. His current one about Elliot Ness and the torso murder in Cleveland, another unsolved one, or supposedly unsolved. Those are almost sometimes the ones that a writer clings to because there's a possibility that you can be the one to finally solve it once and for all. So think of all the Black Dahlia books that have been written from people planning to figure that, or the Jack the Ripper, right?
Yeah.
We're attracted as readers and writers, I think, to the unsolved ones for sure.
And Dan admitted, we interviewed him a couple of months ago, and he admitted that he was hoping that he would be, his research would be the key to unlocking that case, because Elliot Ness is a legendary figure in law enforcement, and yet wasn't able to solve this horrible series of crimes. And I think we all have a little bit of that armchair detective in us, where we think,
I think that's the appeal of true crime, isn't it? It's the appeal is, I'm going to solve this. I'm going to figure out whatever's eluded all these minds, all these geniuses, all the police, all the other people. I'm gonna crack this at last. That's the intellectual appeal for people who haven't actually lost somebody to a true crime. It's the same thing. It's the appeal of, this is a problem that I will apply my formidable intellect to yield a solution that has eluded everybody else.
And I'll figure it out. And people enjoy creating their own theories, putting it out there and discussing it. I was looking on social media today about the Delphi case, and there's a lot of people who have a lot of theories. And it's funny that they are continuing, I'll say, to debate those theories, even though a suspect has been arrested. Now, of course, the question becomes, was he involved? And then were these other potential suspects involved?
Yeah.
In case our listeners aren't aware, you and Dan are pretty good friends, and you guys actually have moved in the same circles in terms of subject matter. Who was writing about Poe first?
That's a really good question. So yes, The Beautiful Cigar Girl came out the same year as The Pale Blue Eye. Also that same year, a book by Matthew Pearl called The Poe Shadow, which was all about the mystery surrounding Poe's death.
Oh, yeah.
And none of us was aware of each other coming into this. So it's just one of those harmonic convergences that actually happens a lot, I think, in the publishing world and also in the movie and TV world. There's a weird kind of synchronicity that happens where 2 or 3 different people happen to converge on the same subject. So I only met Dan because our books came out at the same time. I thought, let's just get together and chat about this. And Matthew Pearl reached out to me as well around the same time. He had written the Da Vinci Code. And so it was, and they're both lovely guys. So we called ourselves the Po Boys, or the Po Boy Sandwich. Yes. But that was just accident. That's just accident. But I think it also speaks to Poe's enduring appeal. He's just an interesting guy that people always want to figure out, much like a crime itself. We always want to figure him out.
So when we turn to The Pale Blue Eye, how much of that is based in fact and how much is fictionalized?
I feel bad saying this on a true crime podcast.
Go right ahead.
The only true part was that Edgar Allan Poe was at West Point for 6 months. By the way, when I say Edgar Allan Poe, he really went by Edgar A. Poe through his life. There's only, I think, one time he wrote his name as Edgar Allan Poe. So it's interesting that that's how he's known. Anyway, he was there for 6 months, but there were no crimes that I know of that were committed in that time. I think in the 1820s, he was there in 1830, but in the 1820s, there was a cadet who was sentenced to death, but not for killing anybody. Now I'm trying to remember why. But I think that sentence was commuted. So there were no deaths. No, that was just me deciding to throw some shit into the game and make some trouble that Poe could help to solve. And that's where that came from.
It's mostly made up then.
Yes,
from the mind of.
Yes, but there are real life characters in there. Sylvanus Thayer, who was the superintendent of West Point, Ethan Allan Hitchcock. I couldn't believe that the commandant of West Point had a last name of Hitchcock, but yes,
there he was. Yeah,
it was like a gift from God, that name. And there was a Benny Havens tavern that the cadets would escape to drink. They weren't supposed to leave the reservation, as they called it in those days, or drink, but they would sometimes break out and go to Benny Havens. There are songs that immortalized it. There are these bits and pieces along the way that are based in reality, but the crimes itself are my own invention, inspired, of course, by Mr. Poe.
I know that when you get into the process for writing this book, you do have to do a certain amount of research to make sure that the things that you're conveying are accurate. So what are some of the things that you learned about criminology and detectivism that you had to apply to both Poe and Gus Landor?
First of all, there wasn't a lot of either of those things. The word detective was not even in the English language when Poe was alive. So Dupin does not refer to himself as a detective. That noun came around a few decades after that. He was around for Holmes. I'm guessing it was. So there really wasn't a word in the English language to convey somebody who spends his time solving crimes. And that shows that the concept itself had not really yet taken hold in our culture. In addition to that, the science of which you're speaking was very primitive. But the person to go back to just another generation back is to Vidocq, about whom I wrote another book called The Black Tower. His name is Eugène-François Vidocq. He was a legendary policeman, a French policeman, who was originally a convict and worked his way up the chain and became the founder of the Sûreté, which was the first plainclothes detective force anywhere that we know of. And he was the first one to really start applying science to this. He was the first one to take plaster impressions of footprints. He was the first to look at ballistics. He actually theorized the possibility of fingerprints before they had even been proved. So he was the first one. Yeah, and this was a couple decades before Poe. In fact, Dupin, in one of the stories, alludes to Vidocq in a rather slighting way. He was a good guesser. But in fact, yeah, he had to kill that father. But Vidocq was the first one to actually think about approaching this as a science. So that was the intellectual foundation of what we would call detectivism today. Is a guy like Vidocq thinking we can do this in a systematic way. He kept card files of all the criminals in Paris at the time, so that he could match them up to whatever evidence. He was the first one really to make this a profession, and then Dupin's character kind of takes that in the next level, and then Holmes takes it from there.
Well, and how did Vidocq come onto your radar then?
It was through Poe. Because I was like, who is this Vidocq that Dupin is dissing? Who is this guy? And then I followed back to him. And I found Vidocq was the inspiration for both Jean Valjean and Javert in Les Miserables, because he was both of those people. He was the he was the hunted convict, and then he was the genius detective who would track him down. Vidocq's memoirs were enormous bestsellers in their day. We're talking the 1820s, 1830s, and themselves almost entirely fictional. So you could almost argue that they are the first detective fiction in our culture. But they were certainly a big influence on the people who followed.
So even though Vidocq was a seeker of truth, his memoirs are embellished, shall we say?
They were embellished. He had a ghostwriter who helped him with that. And I think he wanted to sell a lot of books and make some money. And who can blame him for that? So did Eliot Ness, apparently, toward the end. He also had a collaborator, as Dan's book makes clear.
Yeah.
Who wanted to pump up the jam a little bit and make the stories about Capone a little sexier than they were.
Yeah. We had talked about Eliot Ness's early successes and visibility through the mass media of the day, primarily newspapers.
Yeah.
And he understood how the press and media worked, and they wanted a good story, that he actually had a harder time in the second half of his life, even meeting, never mind exceeding, the expectations of him as a solver of crime or
untouchable, all that good stuff. That part of Dan's book made me think more highly of him, because you could see he's resisting this iconography that they were trying to envelop him in. He was like, no, I'm not that guy. And I got the sense from Dan's book that he was troubled by it all the way to the end. He really didn't want to go there. He also had some financial needs. So as you said, he understood the process, but he also understood the complexity of submitting yourself to that.
Did you find yourself then traveling to West Point at any point to get the lay of the Hudson Valley? Was that?
Yeah, I did go to West Point for a couple of days. This was 2005 probably when I went there. And it was right after 9/11, so a lot of it was shut down.
Oh, yeah.
I had to get a faculty member just to squire me around to some places. And a lot, of course, the old West Point is gone. It's true of all the books I write. I tend to write about lost worlds, so you have to find them through books. But one of the things that really struck me about West Point is they really, at that time anyway, did not acknowledge Poe in any way. There was no... If you go to UVA, his room is a shrine.
Right.
Like Edgar Allan Poe said. Edgar Allan Poe spent 6 months at UVA, which is about the same amount of time he spent at West Point. West Point doesn't even acknowledge that he was there. At least they didn't then. There was nothing about him in the gift shop, nothing about him on the tour.
No, but he washed out. He washed out. I come from a Navy family.
Army family myself.
So if you wash out, it's like you never existed.
You're embarrassed. He was an embarrassment to them. He was an embarrassment, I think, to them. As was James Whistler went there, another one a couple of decades later, and also unacknowledged. So they didn't become great military leaders, and hence why would we bring them up? I'm wondering now if it's changed, because I know that when they filmed The Pale Blue Eye, they brought down some West Point instructors to help coach the actors who were playing the cadets.
Oh, interesting.
So I know they were willing to go that far, but it wasn't filmed there because I think a lot of the campus is still off limits.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
Let's talk a little bit about the movie and when you had first posted the poster and then you started posting the trailers on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I nearly lost my mind. It looks fantastic. So when did you find out that it was going to be, it's an actual go, this thing is happening?
Yeah.
And talk a little bit about that process of learning, hey, they're making my book into a movie. That's got to be an amazing feeling.
It's pretty cool. It doesn't suck. So this started back in 2006 when the book came out, and a guy named Scott Cooper, who had written and directed Crazy Heart, that was the movie that won Jeff Bridges an Oscar. So he put an option on it. And just for your listeners, I need to explain, an option is not anything like a green light. An option is just somebody saying, you know what, this book looks interesting. Let me take it away for a year and see if I can make something happen. 99% of the time, nothing ever happens because there are so many things that need to align for a movie to be made at any time. So after a year, Scott went away and I was like, okay, whatever. I've been instructed by my agent never to put any amount of energy into thinking that anything will happen.
It's more likely not going to happen than it is going to happen.
Exactly. Because it just takes so many things to align. There's so much happenstance that needs to happen. So 16 years go by, and then Scott renews the option. It's like,
oh, you're kidding.
Nice. Same guy.
Wow.
He'd always had it in the back of his head as something he wanted to do. And it turned out that he had an actor who was interested in doing it. And then that was Christian Bale, with whom he'd already done 2 movies prior to that. So suddenly Christian Bale has a film project that falls through. He has a hole in his schedule. And then suddenly it happens. And I had less than zero control over any of this. And I was the last to know that they didn't contact me or my agents. I learned about it from an Hollywood Reporter article that somebody sent me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, well, that's nice. That's good. And then they shipped it around. There was a European film market thing, or I forget what it's called. Anyway, they were selling it around there, and it got a record bid from Netflix. And then suddenly it was happening. So I was surprised as anyone. I wasn't I wasn't in those rooms. I wasn't part of those negotiations. I just learned about it after it was all done. But of course, I was delighted.
Wow. And of course, I was thrilled to hear that it's going to be Harry Melling who's playing Poe.
Yes.
Did you get to meet any of these guys? Did you meet Christian Bale, Harry Melling, like any of this? Or was this complete? Yes. Did it happen after you? Was it done and then you learned about it?
Yeah. They cast everything with it. Yeah. I was not consulted on any of the casting, but of course, as Delight, Robert Duvall, Gillian Anderson, I'll take them. Thank you.
Yeah, really.
You. But I was actually already familiar with Harry Melling. For those people who don't know the name, he was the original Dudley Dursley in the Harry Potter movies, which is fascinating to me. But then he lost a lot of weight and kind of grew up into this really marvelous leading man. I saw him in The Queen's Gambit. He's one of the chess players who's helping our heroine get through life. And then I saw him in this wonderful Coen Brothers Western called The Ballad of Lester Scruggs, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Where he plays this armless, legless guy who declaims poetry and is carried from town to town by Liam Neeson.
It's kind of a wonderful, weird character.
Yes. And then I got to visit the set for a day back in, it was December. It was just a few days before I contracted COVID. I remember clearly.
Oh, ouch.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I was supposed to. Yeah, I didn't get it there.
Oh, can't you blame them anyway? Come on, it would make a good story.
Yeah, they were actually very ferocious about their masks. In fact, there was somebody on the set who called herself the COVID snitch, who was looking to make sure everyone was wearing the correct mask, pulling it down. But anyway, I got to meet Bale and Melling both, and Robert Duvall. It was lovely. And I will say, I've seen the movie, and Harry Melling they're both great. Because Christian Bale's going to be great, but Harry Melling is superb. He manages the Richmond accent that Edgar Allan Poe would have had.
Oh, okay.
And they made him up. They actually shaved a half inch of his hairline back to give him that bigger brow.
Oh, wow.
And the final scene, he looks so remarkably like Poe. It's eerie. So, wow. Okay. This just shows you what film artisans can do.
I was actually sitting in the audience with Dan, and we were talking about the casting of Harry Melling. We were waiting for you to talk to Hugh Bonneville. And I'd asked him, do you think Harry Melling is the best choice, or who would you like to see as Poe? And his immediate answer was, not John Cusack.
Yes. John Cusack has a dark place in my soul because he put out, this is right around the time the first option came out there. Was it called The Raven?
The Raven, yeah.
Yes,
it was.
Yes.
It was this Poe movie that just died on impact. I think it played
It was terrible.
in local theaters for 2.5 hours. I think it lasted through the first actual showing, and it was gone. And there was actually an article that came out in the time that's killed any chance of a Poe movie happening anytime soon. So I feel like he stunk up the joint a bit with that one. It took a while for the climate to clear for another Poe movie, but that's all right. It happened.
When you were listing the cast, I was thinking, gee, it's too bad none of the good people were available, because it's one spectacular name after another, all incredible actors, and it just sounds fantastic.
I wouldn't have been able to speak if I'd met Robert Duvall. I don't think I wouldn't know what to say. I wouldn't even know where to start.
Yeah, yes, it was fascinating just to watch him do his thing, and he's 91 now, I think.
Oh my gosh! Wow,
he's well on in years. I should say it's a small part. It's basically a cameo part, but it's just great to see him up on the screen again doing his thing.
This is the part when I get to admit my lifelong crush on Gillian Anderson.
Oh, you and me both, Bill. And I'm gay. I'm still all over her. It's like I'm fascinated by her. So
I think she's great, and my partner Pamela loves her as well. We'll watch her in anything because she's going to turn in a real subtle, nuanced, amazing performance, no matter what character you hand her.
Who would have thought of her as Margaret Thatcher? And then you watch it on.
I know, and she was fantastic.
She's amazing.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And now I'm going to lose that detective series she did in Ireland a couple of years ago.
The Fall.
That was incredible.
Oh, so good. So good. Yeah. Yeah, with Jamie Dornan, right?
Yes, he was the bad guy. He was the killer. It was really
such a good show.
Spectacularly
And she was so insanely sexy in that show, I think. Just as this, again, the brilliant detective applying her wits, but so just smokingly hot sexy.
Let it be noted for the record that the gay man is the one that said that she was sexy.
She could turn me, Bill. She could turn me.
Oh, wow. Here we go.
Yeah, I think she could.
I didn't know we were going to get that confessional.
So you said you've seen the film already. Does it remain fairly faithful to the book, or does it take some artistic license that made you go, oh?
No, I consulted on the script. They were
you did
to share successive drafts with me. Yeah, he didn't need to do that. Was incredibly generous and secure of him, honestly, to do that.
Yeah.
So I understood from the start, and I think this is why he wanted to work with me, is I got that translating a book to a film, your darlings. Yeah. A certain number of darlings have to be killed in that process.
Very compressed.
Yeah. You have to pair. It's not a limited run series. It's a 2-hour movie. So I knew a lot of stuff would have to go away. And I think it was clear in Scott's mind that it had to be a slightly less supernatural story than the book is, because the book is kind of steeped in, there's an acrostic poem. There's lots of stuff going on. So it's a little less, but there's still that sense of revenants, to use another movie title, of people who won't quite stay dead. So that's there. And no, I was really pleased with how faithful he wanted to remain to the book. And then I saw the movie a couple weeks ago, and I will just say, because I had nothing to do with it, it's beautifully filmed. It's gorgeously photographed, and the score is by Howard Shore, who did the Lord of the Rings.
Wow.
And this is why I'm encouraging all my friends to go see it for the 3 weeks it's in a movie theater, because it should be seen. It's one of those movies you really do want to see in a theater, just to get a sense of its gorgeous. Very dark, of course, but beautiful. Just stunning to look at. And so I'm very pleased with it. I couldn't be happier.
So you aren't one of those authors that finds himself sitting there in the dark watching the movie saying, I didn't write that.
No, I'm savoring the bits that I did write, and to hear my lines coming out of Gillian Anderson, for instance, or Robert Duvall. To hear the people saying my original lines is pretty surreal, I gotta say, but something I enjoyed.
The book is out now, of course, and you can find it just about everywhere, including the Storehouse of the World, Amazon. But we encourage you to buy it from small indie booksellers.
Yes,
I would say, for example, in DC, Politics and Prose is probably one of the best of the indie bookstores up there.
E-City Books as well. Yes. Yes. But wherever you can find an independent bookseller, please, whether it's this book or not, please patronize them, because they're doing us all a solid by doing what they do.
Yeah. And so then the movie comes out when and on what streaming services and what theaters?
It'll be out in theaters, select theaters near you, on December. I have no idea what that means. I'll find out what that means. December 23rd. It'll be in theaters for 3 weeks. And then starting January 6th, it'll be streaming on Netflix. So it should be available wherever you have a Netflix subscription. So don't let your subscriptions go idle. You'll need to be on top of this.
Keep the TV warmed up. December 23rd, 3 weeks in the theaters. Yes. January 6th, 2023. It makes its debut on Netflix.
Yes.
And may I ask a nuts and bolts question?
Sure.
When these options are exercised, do you get paid? Does somebody send you a check and say, we want to option your movie for the next year?
Yes, you get paid usually with, it depends, but you usually get paid something with an option. Some people will ask for an option for nothing. That occasionally happens. It's all a thing that agents negotiate. But yes, you get an upfront payment. So I have not received any payment since. I don't get a share of the budget. Netflix doesn't pay me anything. My money came strictly from that upfront option payment.
So did those dirtballs pay you the second time when they optioned the movie?
They did. It was actually pretty nice. We fixed our roof. We got some dining room furniture.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Paid us a couple of credit cards. It came at a really good time, I got to say. I was stressing. We had a kid in college, and I was stressing.
The timing was good.
The timing was really good.
It was like more than an electric bicycle level payment.
Yes, it was more than electric, but not as much as a Tesla or or Lamborghini or any of that stuff, or anywhere near that. But still, it was welcome. It was welcome and appreciated.
So can you tell us about some future projects, or are you keeping those on the DL for a little bit?
I'm working on a book right now that is on the DL by order of my agent. But I just published a book last June called Jackie and Me. Not a gothic thriller mystery, but a kind of courtship novel surrounding Jackie Bouvier and Jack Kennedy, as told by Jack Kennedy's best friend, Lem Billings. So it's a kind of interesting love triangle with a lot of... I've actually moved, interestingly, I've moved away as an author from Gothic mystery thriller thing, not deliberetely, it just is where I wound up drifting. My whole career has been basically drifting from one thing to another. It's interesting to be reestablished as this dark Gothic guy, but I'm just trying to keep the stories rolling and keep everything happening.
Oh, Jackie and Me was tremendous. I loved it. And I wish I hated not being able to get to any of your book events for it, but it was...
You're 3 hours away, Kristin. I would not expect that of you.
No, I want to be able to come to them whenever I can. And that was one of those times where nothing seemed to fit right with my schedule. Yeah. But oh no, Jackie and Me is terrific. Even though most of our true crime holiday gift guide is crime related, I would say for any of our listeners who want something really good to buy, Jackie and Me is fantastic. I just loved it.
Thank you very much.
Although Kristin has been accused of emptying our listeners' wallets as they go out and buy all these books.
People keep saying, stop recommending stuff I need to read.
I was going to say, authors will not complain about Kristin doing this for them. They will not be. They'll be the last ones to complain, but thank you.
As you move around stylistically, Lou, you're not thinking, I want to put that aside and I want to move in this direction. It's more where your creative heart takes you?
Yeah. That's a really good way of describing it, Bill. I think it is where I'm just feeling energized right now. And it's funny, I tried to get twice now. I've tried to get a witch novel off the ground. I have a direct ancestor who was an accused witch in Hartford, Connecticut, 20 years before the Salem witch trials. Hartford had its own witch panic. She was one of the people dragged into jail over it. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have an accused witch in my family tree.
No, seriously.
We need to write this. And it's been very hard for me to get it off the ground. And I don't know whether it's just that I don't have the energy for it anymore, or it's just I haven't figured out the right angle. It's my book in the drawer.
Yeah.
Every author has a book.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's still in the drawer and I haven't given up on it. So hopefully someday I can drag it out.
All right. I'm going to put an offer out on the table here.
Okay.
My partner, Pamela, and I have a beautiful 1880 Victorian house in Norfolk, Connecticut. We're not in Hartford, but we're only 45 minutes away.
That's pretty close, yeah.
And it's a wonderful old spooky house. You're welcome to come up here if you need a base of operations. And
it's haunted? You're saying it's haunted?
There are things go bump in the night. I think it's I think it's Oliver the Dachshund, but I'm not sure.
I was going to say, or is that you, Bill? At my age, I'm the one going bump in the night. Yeah.
I didn't know there was a Hartford witch scare. We're 4 years in this house.
1662 is when it happened.
1662.
Yeah, check
witch
it out.
Scare. Wow. His eyes lit up. That would be Ms. Dilley, because when Kristin was up here with her partner, Mark, they were doing the Salem thing, and witchcraft definitely was a thread throughout her last New England vacation.
You can only teach the crucible so many times without it suddenly becoming, it's ingrained in me now. So
well, one of the issues I found as a writer is the Puritans are really tough.
Yeah.
They're really weird. They are weird as people. And I think in some ways we're closer to the people of Shakespeare's London than we are to the Puritans. They were deeply supernatural. So that they really thought the devil was walking abroad and was visiting their world with their towns and recruiting individuals. So witch hunts were like national security efforts to protect the community from these people. So it's hard to get into that mindset, really. They saw the world in very different terms than we do.
Oh, yeah.
And weren't a lot of fun, let's be honest. They weren't a lot of fun to hang out with. So that was part of the issue, too.
The Puritans and good time don't necessarily appear in the same sentence all that often.
Exactly.
But I think this idea that there could be a physical manifestation of evil amongst them, this is the distrust of strangers, or, what they saw as odd behaviors, hysteria.
Yeah.
And also, I think they seem to have a problem with a woman stepping out of line in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Suddenly
I think all the research shows that the people who were targeted were outliers, were single women. Yeah. Women who were kind of not acting according to norms. So, for sure.
Whatever those were.
Yes, exactly.
Yep. And all you have to do is ask Nathaniel Hawthorne about uppity women who can't stay in their place.
I read the Scarlet Letter as part of my research just because it's right in the heart of that. They're just weird. They're really weird. And so you always have to think when I go into a novel, do I want to spend 2 years with these people?
Yes.
Do I want to have them in my life for 2 years? And so that's always a consideration.
The one thing before we let you go that I didn't ask you about was your research process, because we did talk to Dan at length about the amount of time that he spent paging through old scrapbooks in Cleveland. What is your research process like, and how deeply into Poe's world did you have to delve to get to the pale blue eye?
I would suggest that my research process isn't as considerable as Dan's or as that of any nonfiction writer. My feeling is that as a novelist, I learn enough to be able to tell the story.
Okay.
And as a result, I'm never what I would call an expert on anything. I also am very clever to say this. I never think of this consciously in advance, but I wrote a book about young Lincoln. I wrote a book about young Jackie Kennedy, young Poe. So that means you really don't have to investigate too much of their life afterwards. You can be a little bit ignorant of that stuff because they're not that person yet. And that's almost the attraction, is catching them in that liminal form where they haven't quite become the person we know. Jackie and Me is not that Jackie yet. She's still finding her way there. And the same with Poe in The Pale Blue Eye. He's not that Poe yet. He hasn't quite found his vocation, his calling. So it's interesting to find them in that place. In terms of West Point, I did there wasn't a lot, honestly. I found a couple of, actually there was a novel that was written 40 years ago, 50 years ago. The Nutmeg Rebellion, the Nutmeg Riots. Anyway, it had a lot of great details, but you just find them where you can. But it's all for me, it's all in the stacks. You just go in the stacks and try to find contemporary first-person accounts of these things and just try to learn what you can. Often the act of writing the book tells me what I still need to know, which is often considerable. So I'll be trying to tell a story and say, oh, wait, I still need to learn about this. And I still need to learn about that. So there's always something. I'm looking right now, I'm in my office. I'm looking at the big book of notes I have for the Pale Blue Eye. It's a rather large notebook now that I think about it. And I remember looking at, there were these 3 British women who were traveling around America around that time. You always go to the foreigners because that's what we are when we go back. We're foreigners. And so they're going to Niagara Falls, which was a huge tourist destination, and they're showing what it would have been like to live then, and it's really valuable.
And that perspective from the alien, if you will, point of view would be if we were flying back to that time and place, that's where we'd be starting.
I forget who said the past is a foreign country, but that's what it is. We're all foreigners to that world. You go back there humbly looking for just details and stuff. I'm always looking for clothes, what people were wearing. I'm always looking for idioms, expressions that they would have used back then. Actually, one of the nicer compliments I received from the Pale Blue Eye about the Pale Blue Eye is that, it feels like a book that was actually written in 1830.
Oh, wow.
That is a real compliment.
That is a compliment. It is a compliment. It's not quite true because I feel like if it had been an 1830 book, it would be unreadable now to most people. So you have to find some hybrid between now and then. But it's nice to know. I should add, too, that a lot of the book is written in Edgar Allan Poe's own voice, which was the challenge I set for myself and was mostly fun to make happen. Oh, and I should add, I also, your listeners might be interested. I listened to recordings of Poe's stories by, we're going back in time, Vincent Price and Basil Rathbone. Yeah. Wow. So these old time horror actors, I would have these stories like playing alongside me as I was writing, because I thought it just would get me in the right place. So yeah, it was lovely. I loved researching that book.
I can imagine. So it feels good when the New York Times calls Pale Blue Eye gruesomely entertaining.
Yes.
But I don't know if that was what you were going for.
Of course I was going for that. Absolutely. No.
Yeah, I'm looking at my copy.
Yeah, there it is. No, the New York Times review is I'm still quoting from that review. It was so lovely that I'm still snipping from it as I go through life. I'm just, turning it into a permanent rave. But it's nice. No, anytime the Times says it approves of your work, it's a good thing.
Yeah, this has some amazing reviews. So the book is The Pale Blue Eye. The movie and soon to be Netflix movie is also called The Pale Blue Eye. And in addition to Pale Blue Eye, give us the name of your book about Vidocq again for our listeners who are interested in going further back.
Yes, it's called The Black Tower. It's set in 1818 Paris and involves potentially the lost Dauphin of France, who was supposedly killed during the revolution, but may have survived. It's like an Anastasia story of this royal figure who might have made it out of all the devastation. So, yes.
And then for the Christmas-loving person among us, you also have Mr. Timothy.
There we go. I love how we're working through the canon. Thank you for this. Mr. Timothy is about Tiny Tim. Not the curly-haired troubadour, familiar to people of my generation, but the actual Dickens character. And yes, it's again a sort of gothic mystery thriller set during Christmas, but with a grown-up Tiny Tim. He's now a grown man living in London, living in a brothel, and teaching the madam how to read and combing the Thames River for bodies. So he's not your grandmother's Tiny Tim.
Really not.
That was really by design. That was my homage to Dickens, but also my desire to make Tiny Tim a character I could stand. I never liked Tiny Tim. That's my confession there. Oh. While we're being confessional, I've confessed my feelings for Gillian Anderson, and now I'm confessing my feelings about Tiny Tim, which is I never could stand him. So the book is my way of kind of turning him into somebody I
God bless us, everyone.
God bless us, everyone.
Your heart and get you there. Okay.
And next time we have you on, we want to talk about your research into the brothel lifestyle.
Yes. Yes. What do you need to know, Bill? Just message me privately about what you need to know about that. Absolutely.
Lou, we loved having you on. This was fantastic. And we are encouraging all of our listeners to read, especially The Pale Blue Eye, but also anything in your canon, because really at this point you do have it's a wide variety of wonderful books. So thank you so much for joining us on our episode.
Thank you. This has been a blast. I really enjoyed my time here.
That's going to do it for this episode of Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.